Well, let me ask you a very simple question. Would you be prepared to fight for this country? What about your loved ones? Would you be prepared to send them up to fight as well? And free drug overdose kits are to be made available for opioid addicts. Is this a good idea? Should we now start treating drug abuse as a public health issue? And let's face it, right, people seem to be constantly offended in this society. And according to one columnist, we're living in the age of outrage. Are we? Yes, indeed, that's all to come in the next hour, and also a very important conversation. A row has broken out between the UK and America about tea. How on earth do we make the best cup of tea? Microwaving it? Salt? What on earth is going on? Before we get stuck into all of that, let's cross live for tonight's latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you. Good evening. Well, Sir Keir Starmer claims Rishi Sunak is being bullied by his own MPs, with today's Prime Minister's questions dominated by accusations of Tory infighting. That's after Sir Simon Clarke wrote in the Daily Telegraph warning of an electoral massacre for the party unless there's a change of leader. The MP rebuffed the criticisms, though, saying Labour doesn't understand Britain's values. But Sir Keir says the infighting has now descended into a soap opera.
Seen this story time and time again with this lot. Party first, country second, safely ensconced in Westminster, they get down to the real business of fighting each other to death. The country forced to endure their division and chaos. The longest episode of EastEnders ever put to film.
You can see exactly why Hizbut Tahrir hired him in the first place. But he wants to talk about these things. Even his own party are now realising that he simply doesn't have a plan for this country, Mr. Speaker. The member for Dagenham and Raynham said it's difficult to identify the purpose of his leadership. And long-time celebrity backer Steve Coogan recently said he licks his finger, sticks it in the air and just sees which way the wind is blowing.
Rishi Sunak. Now, a judge has today been urged not to pass a whole life order on the man who stabbed 3 people to death in Nottingham. Valdo Kaulakane pleaded guilty to manslaughter by diminished responsibility for killing students Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar, as well as caretaker Ian Coates in June last year. The 32-year-old admitted trying to murder 3 pedestrians who were hit by a van on the morning of the attacks as well. Well, sentencing began today and is due to conclude tomorrow. The government says it's committed to postal deliveries 6 days a week, despite a report by Ofcom suggesting some days could be cut to save costs. Number 10 says the government will engage with the options outlined by the regulator, but insists deliveries on Saturdays should remain. Ofcom says it's vital the postal service is modernised to meet the evolving needs of consumers, with other options including slowing down deliveries, most letters taking 3 or more days to arrive. But Communication Workers Union spokespeople say the changes risk destroying Royal Mail altogether. Local councils are set to receive a £600 million boost, 500 of which will be used to support social care. It comes after MPs called for a funding boost for struggling councils on the brink of bankruptcy. The money will initially be used for children's and adult social care over the next 18 months, but reports suggest many councils believe the funding will only prevent a financial crisis in the short term. Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove says the funding is vital.
It's £600 million extra for local authorities, with money being directed principally towards children and children with special educational needs. We can only devote this additional money because of the great economic management of Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, and we simply wouldn't have been able to do it if we'd followed Labour's plans to borrow £28 billion.
Michael Gove. Now, the Met Office has said in the last hour it is still very windy in the north of England, with strong gales in some places, but Storm Jocelyn is slowly easing off. The storm last night left thousands without power in Scotland and many unable to get to work after trains were cancelled. ScotRail has also said in the last hour 95% of its network is now operational. At least one person, though, is still missing in South Wales after going into the sea at Porthcawl last night. It was the 10th named storm of the season, hitting much of Britain just 2 days after Storm Isha claimed 2 lives. Now, a claim of so-called copycatting by discount supermarket Aldi has been dismissed by the High Court. Thatcher's Ciders had accused Aldi of copying its branding, citing the supermarket's Taurus Cloudy cider. Aldi has previously been accused of mimicking its rivals with the Cuthbert the Caterpillar, reminding many shoppers of M&S's more familiar Colin. Others have pointed to similarities between its jammy wheels and the classic jammy Dodger, which was first introduced in 1960. A spokesperson for Aldi told GB News today there's nothing cloudy about this judgment. International news, and a Russian military transport plane has crashed near the Ukrainian border. Reports are saying it was carrying Ukrainian prisoners of war who are going to be exchanged in a swap. The RIA news agency cited Russia's defence ministry saying there were 65 Ukrainian prisoners on board, with 6 crew members and 3 others. Reports say there are no survivors. And in the United States, Donald Trump swept a victory in the New Hampshire primaries overnight, leaving his new challenger, Nikki Haley, with few paths now to the White House. The former president took 55% of the vote, while Joe Biden secured a comfortable win for the Democrats. But Mr. Trump could be in for an uphill battle despite strong support among hard right. He's still facing 91 criminal charges. That's the news on GB News, across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. This is Britain's News Channel.
Thanks for that, Polly. That Aldi story there just made me want... I'm suddenly craving some beef Monster Munch. I do love those crisps. Anyway, I am Michelle Dewberry. I'm with you till 7 o'clock here on Dewbs & Co. Alongside me, my panel, the PR consultant Alex Dean and the senior lecturer at Queen Mary University, Richard Johnson. Good evening, gents, to both of you.
Pickled onion Monster Munch.
Oh, I can't bear pickled onion
Lovely.
crisps.
I
Oh.
want Cuthbert the Caterpillar.
Oh, do you?
There you go.
But who even likes pickled onions anyway?
I can't... No, I do like pickled onions, but 2, pickled onions in a crisp, delicious.
I got some scampi and lemon knickknacks for Christmas, and that was one of my favourite
Not bad.
presents.
I prefer nice and spicy.
Yes, anyway, I digressed. You know the drill on Dewbs & Co. You can get in touch with us tonight with whatever is on your mind, whether it's crisps or anything else. Get in touch with me. GBViews at gbnews.com is how you reach me, or you can tweet me at GBNews. Got a packed show coming up to talk to you about tonight. On the agenda also, I do want to talk to you about a cup of tea, because there's a very strange row that's broken out between the US and the UK about what makes a perfect cup of tea, so I'll come on to that. Also, I want to talk to you about national service. Yes, look, I'm taking one for the team. I have dressed as a beef eater. As my viewer Dave has just pointed out, I'm getting into the fighting spirit, becoming all nationalistic or whatever the word is. But would you fight for your country? We'll come on to that story in a few minutes. But speaking of fighting, the Tories are at it again. I don't know what is wrong with these guys. Today now you've seen Sir Simon Clarke. He has written a piece in The Telegraph, and he's basically saying that MPs need to get rid of Rishi Sunak as their PM or face being massacred in the pending general election. Other Tories, I have to say, they've come out and said he needs to basically stop it, and that the party needs to unite around Rishi Sunak. What do you make to it all, Richard?
I think changing the leader now is too little too late. I mean, this country, in my view, doesn't feel markedly better than it did in 2010. We've become used to food banks. The levels of homelessness are higher than what we saw under the previous Labour government. Public infrastructure feels like it's crumbling. Incomes will be lower at this upcoming election than they were at the last election. And so, yes, you can say, you could try to relitigate whether it was correct to get rid of Boris Johnson and eventually replace him with Rishi Sunak. And maybe the Conservatives might look back at that and think perhaps they made a mistake. But it's too late now to change, and there are bigger issues at foot here that any leader of the Conservative Party, I don't think, could turn around.
So I just think, what are your lot playing at? Like, they're talking about here that Sunak has gone from asset to anchor. Many MPs would find another change of leader ridiculous, but what could be more ridiculous than meekly sleepwalking towards annihilation? I mean,
yeah.
What are you all doing?
I mean, apart from anything else, if you want to replace a leader, you can't just do it in theory. You have to have someone who's actually willing to replace them and a good candidate. And all the people who are agitating for this, I mean, there aren't that many of them, but the people who are agitating for it talk about it in theory. You know, a theoretical person might be a better candidate against Starmer. Well, you need an actual person to fill that gap. But moreover, even if that weren't the case, which it is, the ability of the right of the Conservative Party, to which I belong, to convene a circular firing squad and then start pulling the trigger until the magazines are empty is remarkable. I mean, if you think about the fact that, I mean, David Cameron sort of went on his own terms, not, you know, at least he decided the time of his own going. But Theresa May, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss have all been defenestrated by their own MPs. Not a single shot in anger fired by the Labour Party. They're all defenestrated by their own side. The idea of adding another one to that list at this point in the electoral cycle, I just think, with due respect to Sir Simon Clarke, is crackers.
Yeah, but, sorry, Richard, go.
It's quite, I mean, the differences in the political cultures between Labour and the Conservatives are very interesting on this. This week is the 100th anniversary of the first ever Labour government, and that Prime Minister was Ramsay MacDonald. Ramsay MacDonald became Labour leader, challenging the previous Labour leader successfully, a man called John Robert Clines in 1922. That was the last time a Labour incumbent leader lost a leadership challenge to someone else, and Labour got a new leader without that leader going under their own terms. The Tories have trebled that in this decade. And so there's something different about the way that and I think it's partly because the Conservative Party does have this kind of ruthless pursuit of power in it, above all else. I do.
But isn't that politicians generally? I think
with Labour, part of the political culture of Labour is there's an idealism that's baked into the Labour Party. And yes, there's a lot of infighting in Labour. I'm not putting that aside. But I think the Conservatives, they can be more mechanical, more precise about that pursuit of power. That being said, this particular intervention, I don't think, gets them any closer to that pursuit of power.
Yeah, well, I agree with that entirely. Sunak will lead the Conservative Party into the next election, and he should do. But reflecting on your point about the difference in political culture, the cost for the Labour Party, on the other hand, really is this. We'll come up soon, we'll have this next general election before it, but we'll come up soon on 20 years since the last time the Labour Party won an election, 2005. And, of course, they were led then by Tony Blair. And if you take Tony Blair out of the equation, the Labour Party hasn't won an election in my lifetime. They've only won, and I'm 44, they've only won an election with Blair at the helm. And that might suggest, on the other hand, the Labour Party is not quite ruthless enough. And certainly, whilst in the end, given the electorate gave their verdict in 2019, Jeremy Corbyn went, that was a bad period for the Labour Party, corrosive and damaging, and quite arguably, I think, the Labour Party took too long to get rid of a leader who, whatever you think of the Sunaks and Johnsons of this world, they had a leader who was worse for their brand and for their standing. So the Labour Party, in my view, could probably do with being a bit more ruthless.
Diana says if anyone should go, it should be Simon Clarke. Linda says, Michelle, all of this is called karma, and it's all occurred because Sunak plotted to remove our democratically elected PM Boris Johnson. He's ruined the Conservative Party, and now the country will be punished with a Labour government, she says. Ron says, I wouldn't. I am a lifelong Tory voter, but if Sunak is still the leader at the next election, he says he would not vote Tory. This whole notion about ousting Boris Johnson, there are so many people, many of them watch this programme, many of them get in touch with me, that are still kind of smarting over that. They're not happy that that happened. They feel that they engaged democratically and actually their choice, their will, was just kind of pushed away, discarded because it didn't suit other people's agendas.
Well, I do think there is something to that. I mean, the last YouGov poll that was taken before Rishi Sunak resigned as Chancellor, which helped to precipitate Boris then resigning as Prime Minister, had Labour at 36% and the Conservatives at 33%, a 3-point Labour lead. A poll from YouGov this week had Labour at 47% and the Conservatives at 20%.
But what's the point of all these polls, apart from to keep people busy and earning a bit of money?
Well, it gives us a snapshot of the mood of the nation.
But why do we need to know the snapshot of the mood of the nation every single week in the run-up to an election that's not going to be happening for months on end?
In the same way that people either like to watch political discussion shows or they don't. Some people are interested in those things.
Yeah. Are you at home? Do you feel a need every single week to know that today it's 0.25% over there and 0.5% over there change? Are you into that or not? Continue, Richard.
I think it is. I think it's important because it can also feed back into the government in the sense of if they are going in the right direction or the wrong direction. Now, I agree we shouldn't have government by by poll, and governments need to have a programme and to push forward. But sometimes the polls do show that if the country is turning away from you, you need to correct course. And so I can understand the instincts of what's motivated this latest poll and Simon Clarke's intervention. But quite frankly, I think it's too little too late. I also don't think it's the leader anymore. I think, as James Carville, the American commentator, once said, I think at the end of the day, it's the economy stupid.
Well, of course, the economy is doing rather better than people had expected. We were forecast by the OMB and so forth, and indeed the Bank of England, in its prognostications, had expected a recession by now, and we haven't had one. So, you know, the economy is doing, and certainly compared to Germany and co, we are doing better than we might otherwise do. But I accept your premise, and given that Richard was talking about polling, let me supplement that point by anecdote. When I go and talk to Conservative associations around the country, I tend to find that in safer Tory seats, members of the Tory party, well, you know, leaders come, leaders go, we might prefer one to the other, but, you know, we're in the trenches and there it is, and we'll carry on campaigning for the Tory party. In marginal seats, the seats that the Conservative Party wants to win, you find that tendency you were talking about Boris Johnson kind of Boris regret. You find that quite a lot more significantly, and especially, I think, because you find that people have joined the party in those battleground seats in part because of Johnson. It was him who attracted them to the Conservative Party. He was a different kind of figure and leader. What I'm expressing here plenty of people may dislike Boris Johnson, but they can see what I mean when they say he seemed different, he attracted new people to the brand, and in those, in the marketplace of ideas, in those kinds of seats, he was one of the big differences. The other two big differences at the last election, of course, being Brexit and Corbyn, both of which are off the agenda as well.
Another thing Simon Clarke says, that if Nigel Farage returns to the fray, it looks increasingly likely, basically, extinction for the Tories. Do you share that view, Richard?
I don't share the view of extinction. The Conservative Party is, under some accounts, the most successful political party in the democratic world. It has this remarkable ability to refashion and reform itself even after election defeat. But it could be a historic battering for the Conservative Party at the next election, I think, especially if Nigel Farage gets in. The issue with Boris is that his leadership signalled a change in priorities for the Conservatives, and that he was able to construct a coalition in 2019 that planted itself on historic Labour territory. And I do think that, you know, Boris himself was a flawed agent of that. But with him going, it also represented to those voters that the agenda had changed. And I know that Sunak has tried to reassure them that that's not the case, but he has struggled to do that.
We should beware our spectacles becoming too rose-tinted on the right. Boris Johnson secured a thumping majority in 2019. A fair question would then be, what did we do with it? You know, and there wasn't, I think, whatever one's position, one could be a hardcore Labourite and look at government and say, well, you didn't do very much. I thought we were expecting lots of free market, tax-cutting agendas, liberalising things. What did you do with that 80-seat majority? So there is a fair challenge to that. But I come on to this point that you were raising about reform and co, which seems to me to be another defence of polling, because if you didn't have these polls, you might just be, I reckon that reform's doing OK. As it is, we know they're circling the 10% mark, which is seismic for the Conservative Party.
Well, what do you make to it all? Who's this? Richard says Sunak should go, Jacob Rees-Mogg should run as the party leader. Would you support that one? Lots of you getting in touch. Kemi, another viewer says, what about Kemi being the next leader? What about Suella? I imagine that she might be quite popular with some of you guys at home. Someone else, Alex, says Michelle Sunak should definitely go. He's not going to win. But much more important question, though, where did you get the scampi and lemon knickknacks? I got them from Santa. I do appreciate they're quite hard to get hold of these days, aren't they? But Santa, somehow, he managed it. He's magic, isn't he, after all? Anyway, look, after the break, I want to talk to you about wars. Would you be comfortable putting yourself at the front line to go and fight for this country? If not you, then perhaps your child, your grandchild. Would you do that or not? Apparently, we've got to gear up and prepare ourselves that this potentially might happen. See you in 2.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel. Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On State of the Nation tonight at 8 o'clock, I will be explaining my view of Sir Simon Clarke's extraordinary call for the Prime Minister to be replaced. Can the Tories win under Rishi Sunak? Dad's army may have to return in real life if the British Army Chief Patrick Sanders is right. But could we do it again? Plus, as the Toyota chairman warns of overinvestment in electric cars, could the Green lobby be running out of gas? Tune in tonight at 8 o'clock.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs & Co on GB News with you till 7 o'clock tonight. The PR consultant Alex Dean alongside me, as is the senior lecturer at Queen Mary University, Richard Johnson. Lance says, Michelle, can I just say what a great panel you've got tonight? I'm sure they'll appreciate that, although Alex has just told me that perhaps we can no longer be friends when I was telling him my Monster Munch eating strategy.
It's disgusting.
It's not disgusting.
It's absolutely disgusting.
I have a very particular way that I deal with Monster Munch. I won't tell you what it is because he thinks it's absolutely gross, so I'll keep it to myself. Anyway, let's talk about very serious matters, shall we? Because do you remember, I think it was it last week or so when we spoke about this off the back of the NATO boss's comments? Well, now a UK Army boss is basically General Sir Patrick Sanders. He's come out now today in a speech and said that us Brits, we basically need to get ourselves into the war mindset, the war mentality. This is in the eventuality, the potential eventuality of a war with Russia. We know, don't we, that you know, the army has been depleted.
Yeah.
But I mean, I am a little bit uncomfortable, and me and some of my viewers depart on my opinions when it comes to this kind of stuff. But I feel a little bit worried. I feel like we're too gung-ho. We seem to be hurtling into World War III, seemingly quite happy to be doing so, and it makes me a little bit uncomfortable.
Well, the best way to ensure peace is to have a strong defence, and having a properly equipped and properly sized military doesn't mean that you're bellicose, doesn't mean that you want to go into conflict. It may simply mean that if you want peace, you must prepare for war. And for me, I actually don't think this is a genuine call for mass conscription. I think it is a, no pun intended, warning shot from senior military personnel that we are under-resourcing our military yet again. It's very interesting, and we've been doing this as a country for a long, long time. We came very close before the Falklands conflict to scrapping a number of the warships that were then deployed in the Falklands conflict, literally a matter of months. And if the junta in Argentina hadn't been in such a rush to invade, they might have been much better placed a mere few months afterwards. Here it's even worse because our military is getting smaller and smaller. And if we were, what he means is if we were in a serious conflict right now, our military is too small. And I think it's a very fair point for somebody to make.
Would you stand and fight for your country?
I would. I mean, I dare say I wouldn't be very helpful. I'm not macho, but I am willing. I don't know how useful I would be, but I would absolutely serve and fight and die for my country.
Would you, at home? I'm interested in your thoughts on that. Richard, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen we have about 27,000 fewer regular troops in the army now than in 2010. We've gone from about 102,000 to 75,000. If the Conservatives had kept up with a 2.5% GDP commitment to defence spending, there'd be an extra £90 billion put into defence since 2010. And you hear Conservatives, including the former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, saying that the army has been hollowed out and underfunded by his own government in which he served as Defence Secretary. The reality is, if we are serious about the commitments that we make internationally, we have to be able to put our money where our mouth is. If we really believe in NATO, and we are one of the core founders of NATO, founded under the Attlee government after the war, then we have to be able to we can't just keep looking to the Americans all the time to sort of underwrite the international system. Especially, I think, as the situation within America becomes more uncertain about its willingness to always step up. So we have to play our part, and I'm afraid that the government has neglected this area, and that's why we find comments that Sir Patrick's making at the moment.
Tom, who is an army veteran, says that I suspect a large number of the current younger generation would not be prepared to go for war for this country because they're too busy being offended, protesting or trying to figure out what gender they are. We're going to come on to, before the end of the programme, why we all are so offended at the moment. But Steve says, I am an English, white, straight male, aged 47, and I'm at the back of the queue for absolutely everything in our society. He says, I doubt we would go to war with Russia, but if we did, he says, I'd fight for my country, and I doubt I'd be at the back of the queue then.
It's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy go away, but it's Hello Mr. Atkins when the band begins to play.
Yeah, I mean, we did actually run a poll on this, and we were asking you guys at home whether or not you would go and fight for your country. 63.1 of you said no, while 36.9 of you said yes, you would. And I have to say that doesn't actually surprise me. I also have to say as well that the Ministry of Defence released a statement in response to these conversations and suggestions, saying the British military has a proud tradition of being a voluntary force, and there is absolutely no suggestion of a return to conscription.
Hang on. I mean, it's got a proud tradition, except for recent world wars. I mean, that's true up to a point, Lord Cropper.
Yeah, but you see, does that surprise you, that poll that we've run, that 63% of people basically said that they would not stand and fight?
It's very interesting, and no offence to you, and I appreciate it's the Channel's poll. You were pouring scorn on the notion of national weighted polling. I put very little weight, I'm afraid, on a Twitter poll.
So, but you see, I do think, because a lot of people would actually say that if things were perhaps different, a lot of people don't feel looked after by this country.
Sure.
A lot of people feel that they're quite almost just thrown on a little bit of a scrap heap in this country. And if that's how you feel and you're quite demoralised, then when someone turns around and goes, right, you, I know we've kind of slighted you, I know we've let you down, and I know we've treated you pretty damn badly, but this is your country after all, so come on and step forward and fight. I just think there might be quite a rude awakening for how many people would be prepared to do that.
And that's how civilizations fall and fail. Ultimately, we will decide as a country whether our future is worth living and defending or if it's not. And we are in the course of deciding that, perhaps more slowly than these deadlines you're talking about might suggest. But I hope in the end we decide that it is worth defending. And if you do think that, then perhaps fighting for it's going to be required.
I think people have to have a sense of what the alternative is. Again, if we pull back, if the United States pulls back, then who fills that space? We're in a world now where China is being much more internationally proactive, aggressive. And people might say, OK, well, things that are happening in Taiwan or Ukraine or the Red Sea feel far away. But these things have an immediate impact on us, actually, in terms of disrupting the economic order in which our living standards depend, but also has a longer-term impact, because if we continue to allow, in effect, appease this kind of new mode of territorial aggrandizement, they don't stop. Yes. And they will come closer and closer to interests that people in this country do feel more about. And that's why it's important to nip it in the bud at an earlier stage, so it doesn't escalate into the kind of conflicts that become sucking everyone in like a world war, a global conflict.
I agree with that. And Putin has only been encouraged by the weak response from many Western countries. These people in the end only understand one thing. And whilst your position, Michelle, might be entirely understandable vis-a-vis people's attitude towards their own domestic government and the travails in their own life, you cannot in the end say that life would be better under the Putins of this world rather than democratic government in Westminster. And if these are hard choices in the end. Choose. What
do you think would happen to the international landscape if Donald Trump got elected?
So it's interesting. Trump, in some ways, is far more isolationist than either his predecessor or successor. And Joe Biden is, in a lot of ways, a throwback to a democratic era, not just pre-Trump, but mid-20th century and prior to that, much more engaged in the world and much more outward going. I'm not a fan of the Biden presidency, but that is to their credit. The flip side of the conversation is that Trump's period in office was marked by a remarkable stability and peace in international affairs. People may dislike him for all manner of things he did in governing the United States, but in terms of international conflict, it was the one 4-year period in which Putin didn't invade somebody since the millennium.
Well, he said, didn't he, or he keeps saying, that he would sort out the Ukraine-Russia conflict in a day, I think is his time frame.
Guff.
Well, there was, actually, I think in instinct, oddly enough, Obama and Trump shared quite a lot in common in terms of feeling that the United States had overstretched itself, particularly under the George W. Bush administration. And both of them spoke about this in different ways, but both of them kind of wanted the US to pull back. But the difference with Trump was that there is this sense of uncertainty about him that ultimately, this is called the madman theory of international relations, that other actors, including Putin, were never really sure if he'd be willing to use, as Trump said, the N-word, the nuclear button. And even if that seemed a very, very remote possibility, a more than 0% chance might have restrained Putin for that particular period of time. It's not a stable way of conducting international relations, but in that period, it did deliver a certain degree of ironically, stability.
It's deep. I mean, it's deeply erratic. You're right. But I mean, let's think of something outside the immediate zones. The Trump approach to North Korea was impossible to predict. I hate you, you ridiculous little rocket man. I'm coming to visit you. We'll fix this all in person. The visit's cancelled. You're terrible. I'm coming. Let's skip across the peace line. I mean, your head spun with the positions. But there they were, since the first time since the Korean War, a leader of a Western power walking peacefully into North Korea and back again. I mean, people, of both sides in politics had failed to move that North Korean relationship, and Trump did.
Well, speaking of American and UK relations, the American embassy in London, they've had to apologise because an American academic has basically said you should put salt in your cup of tea. I've never heard anything so ridiculous in all my life, but it's good to see that they had quite a nice sense of humour, because the US Embassy has basically said we'll continue to make our tea in the proper way by microwaving it. Ugh, you don't microwave your tea, surely?
I certainly don't. But there's a little bit of a historical parallel here. Last month was the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, when the American rebels threw perfectly good boxes of tea into the Charles River in Boston Harbor. And that gives you a sense of the contempt that Americans have for that lovely drink.
Well, I've never had anything so ridiculous in all my life. Salt in your tea and microwaving it. Next, you'll be telling me that you use 1 tea bag per cup. You don't do that, do you?
Yes, and 1 for the pot.
Oh, no. I use 1 tea bag per 2 cups. I'm just way too tight. What
Your
can I
tea
say?
is too weak.
It's not. Look at it. Well, actually, I was just about to say, look at it, but I didn't make this one. I can't claim to have made my cup of tea. But anyway, salt in your tea, microwaving your tea, is that for you or not? After the break, I want to talk to you about drugs. Now, drug addicts, their families are going to receive free drug overdose kits. Is this a good idea? Will it start stopping these drug deaths? And do we need to start treating drug addiction as more of a public health issue? You tell me, and I'll see you in 2.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight here on GB News. Stephen says, Michelle, 63% of your poll said that they would not fight for their country. He says, all I can say is it's a good job that people didn't have that opinion in the 1930s, because right now you'd all be sitting there speaking German. He says, Maureen's got in touch and said, my son and my son-in-law are in the military right now. They are leaving there in droves. Their colleagues, they feel poorly paid and undervalued. She says, I'm ex-military too, but I wouldn't fight for my country today. Why would I? Sometimes it feels like our country hates us. Well, there you go. Let me know your thoughts on that. Another topic I want to cover tonight with you, drugs. There's a plan now being announced that basically you'd be giving free drug overdose kits to the family and friends of addicts. This is all about trying to tackle the opioid epidemic. Do you think, Richard, this is a good idea, handing out these kits to people?
I think we have to be led by the science on this, and this is still being trialled and tested. You see actually more developed trials of these type of programs in the United States and in Canada. Vancouver in particular has gone even further and actually administers opioids in controlled settings, and that's the kind of the furthest extreme of this. But basically the issue, as I understand it, is that the street drugs are becoming stronger and less predictable for users, and so when users use these, the likelihood of overdose and death now has skyrocketed. Of course, in an ideal world, we would want people to abstain from drugs and not to take drugs. And I think that is still the message that needs to be sent out. But for those people who are addicted, governments are having to make choices about how they reduce deaths. And this may be one way to do that.
I think that's exactly right about the debate you need to have once someone is in that situation. And we used to deal with this very differently in this country. In the post-First World War period, when people were really starting to use strong opioids, and there's a whole narrative about this. Was it servicemen coming back and become addicted to morphine and painkillers after the First World War and the horrors of the trenches and so forth? Anyway, after the First World War, people started really abusing drugs, and heroin and pre-heroin opiates were things people were getting addicted to. And on private prescription, people used to get heroin. People used to get, in very small numbers, but it was completely containable and they could live basically normal lives, and that was how they were treated. Advent of the NHS doctors would prescribe strong opioids, and it became more and more unfashionable, and psychiatrists and their peers disapproved of it more and more and more, until in the end you couldn't get that sort of drug available from a legitimate doctor. And they were starting using things like oral methadone, which gave nothing like the same hit. And to your point, absolutely, street drugs were getting stronger. What you could get through lawful and legal routes were getting weaker. And then where do you go if you're an addict? You go to get the stronger drug. And so you've got to debate what you want to do once somebody is addicted. It seems to me that's the sensible thing to do.
And do you think then drug use and all the rest of it should be treated as a criminal issue or a public health issue?
It is both. And if you are intoxicated just as much as if you are addicted to a drug, it is not a mitigating factor in the course of committing a crime. Indeed, it can be an aggravating factor that you committed a crime whilst under the influence of an intoxicating substance. But it is also a harmful and pernicious addiction that needs help.
Christine says these kits are a great idea because it might save lives, but she says what we need is much tougher sentences for dealers and much better services for those people whose lives are severely impacted by drug abuse. Kay says definitely drug addiction should be treated as a health issue. She says many people are so depressed now that they turn to these kind of drugs in order to live their life and due to lack of help from their doctor. The idea, Henry says, is ridiculous, and this idea does nothing to help people who have an addiction to drugs. Well, it's not helping the person that's addicted, but it's stopping them from dying, which I guess is the point.
I mean, one of the concerns you might have, and this is a potential argument against kind of full decriminalisation, is that these schemes can sometimes actually increase supply. So reading about this scheme in Vancouver, initially the drugs are administered in a controlled setting, but eventually users are allowed to take these drugs and administer them themselves. But then there's a concern that these get passed on and sold. So you have to have if you're going to go down this public health route, I think you have to have very stringent, carefully thought through processes. Because unfortunately, addiction is such a powerful thing that it leads people to do all kinds of terrible things in pursuit of that next hit or avoiding the come down from
the last one.
Drugs.
And indeed, a lot of people, I mean, part of your point about stringent control, the point of addiction is you want more. And another risk with shooting galleries and state-provided drugs is that you take your state-provided drug and then you go out and try and score on the street as well.
Yeah.
Well, Lee's been in touch and says, are you referring to nalazone? I think that's how you say it.
Yes.
And yes, that is what we're referring to. He says this is a great kit and it's very effective. He's a social worker and he's worked in addiction services. He says he doesn't disagree with handing the kits out to users' families, but he says the issue is that those families will perhaps not be there when their loved ones overdose. He says that he used to give out those kits to opioid users, but he says it ends up essentially opioid users helping other opioid users as opposed to someone's loved one, family and friends back in their own house. What do you make to it all? Get in touch and let me know. 6 people per day. That's what they're hoping to try and prevent dying from drug overdoses with these kits. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on that. After the break, I want to ask you a question. Do you think we're getting angrier and more outraged these days? Apparently, I was reading a column today which says that we are an age of extremes and outrage. Is that true? Are you permanently outraged or not? I'll see you in 2.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewbs with you till 7. PR consultant Alex Dean alongside me, as is the senior lecturer at Queen Mary University, Richard Johnson. Martin's been in touch, said, Michelle, I'm ex-RAF and I would not fight now for this country. He says, I'm a white man and I feel that my country hates me. And I have to say, I have quite a few viewers bringing that response through. Rich says, you don't get to burn my house down and then tell me I'm required to defend its ashes with my life. Someone else has said a good point and I agree with with this, that if you want me to fight for my country, then first of all, get all of the MPs, all of those kind of people up first, and then you can stand behind them. I share that view. Talking about the drugs, Barry says two of the most addictive drugs on sale, alcohol and cigarettes, and no one really seems to care for them. Bob says, I'm a veteran, and if I was asked to fight for my country, I absolutely would. He says, I'm horrified that so many young men would not. He says, but we've made it an easy world with everything on a plate, so he says. And one of my viewers, Gordon, he says, all of this talk about drugs, ultimately, drugs are a choice. He says, what about personal responsibility in this conversation? Do you think that? Do you think addiction is a choice? I mean, OK, granted, it's your choice to take a drug the first time you take it, but do you think addiction is a medical issue or not? Anyway, I asked whether or not we are just constantly outraged. Donald has just emailed in and says, I'm outraged all the time, every day. Don't even get me started on why. And I found this interesting, this column today in The Spectator, actually. It says the age of outrage has arrived. He talks about things like protests, people kind of bringing foreign conflicts to this country, etc. Are we a nation of just being constantly outraged, Alex?
Yes, and I thought that example about foreign conflicts being fought out on our streets is a good example. I mean, people, on the one hand, shouting at the British government about what's been going on in the Red Sea, when the Houthis have been blowing hell out of shipping now for the best part of 10 years. I think that was pretty crazy. I also think the abuse that has been visited upon British Jews, as if they got anything to do with the decisions that Israel makes, has been appalling. But this is also, I read that article, and on the lighter side of it, he points out in January there tends not to be very much news, and therefore people in the news go out looking for stories. Point being, it used to be in a silly season, you go out and find a funny story, you try and find something that's amusing. Now, our media world, they give us what we want. I'm not blaming the media, they reward what we're after. They go out to find something that we're outraged by, and that's all the difference in the world.
I once heard the saying, if it bleeds, it leads, when people were talking about how the media is structured. And all the time people get in touch with me and say, it's really depressing, the news is really depressing, can we have some positive stories, good news stories? And I really kind of look everywhere to find uplifting, positive news stories, and there are just barely any of them around.
Yeah, but I don't think that outrage is something that's new. I mean, if you think about the way that the tabloid newspapers have operated for decades, they seek out outrage. They look for sensationalist stories because, as you say, that's what sells. And for people who do follow the news, I guess it becomes a kind of, there's an element of, well, it spices things up and makes it more interesting. You want to read on. I mean, I remember not that long ago, but about 15 years ago when I was at university, I had a friend who his nickname was Furious George.
Furious George.
He used to get outraged at the things that particularly the Conservatives and Lib Dems were doing. And, you know, I think some people thrive on that.
And where's Furious George now? What became of him? Is he happy?
He's in a very happy marriage with a little boy and is having a nice life.
Voting Tory and hoping for tax cuts.
Because it's not good for you. Stress is not good for you. That's why I'm asking. So Furious George was living so furiously. I always wonder what becomes of you when you're so angry. Rob says when the world is such a chaotic flux, everyone is outraged and offended about everything all of the time. Phil says, I'm outraged by the state of my country. And he goes on to give me quite a few examples. There's a lot of people saying that they are white men, middle-aged white men, and they feel that they are completely kind of pushed aside in society.
Well, you are, of course, it's an inevitable response, because since the dawn of real civilization, we have tried, never yet succeeded, but in glimpsing distance, we've always tried to say that the most important thing is not the colour of your skin or the sex you're born into, it's the content of your character. And for the first generation now, we're telling children that's wrong. The most important thing is your sex and your colour. And you can never escape your inherited guilt. You can never escape the history that is piled upon your shoulders, whilst you personally may be blameless for it, and therefore you are going to be condemned forever into these categories. We will always keep you in separate boxes, and that's how we will judge you. And intersectionally work out how guilty you are and how much there are victims on the other side of it. Well, it's inevitable in the end that the people that fall at the other end of that spectrum feel rather left out, isn't it?
Well, there you go. The tea conversation has got you guys talking. I'm fascinated by how many of you make your tea with loose tea these days. How can you be bothered? And a bit of a faff. Anyway, Gary says, Michelle, these drug addiction kits are fantastic. He works in drug addiction services, and he says he's been giving them out as well to users, and they absolutely save lives. I've had so many people writing in, by the way, saying, please, can you thank your two panellists tonight? They've really enjoyed the programme. So there you go. I am your messenger. Consider them told. But for now, look, that's all we've got time for. Richard and Alex, thanks for your company. Very importantly, thank you at home. Don't go anywhere. Nigel Farage is up next, but I'll see you tomorrow night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. Thursday's going to be another mild day, quite a cloudy one though, with rain particularly across western areas. That's as this weather front is approaching throughout tonight from the south and west. It's a warm front, so it will bring milder air, and ahead of it we do have a ridge of higher pressure, so that's settling things down. So a clear and crisp evening for many northern and eastern areas. We'll see some mist and fog starting to develop, low cloud on the hills as well, and it will be a chilly night for many northeastern areas. We could see a touch of frost by tomorrow morning. However, further south and west, quite a different story, with rain and cloud arriving and temperatures much milder by morning than they will be through this evening. And that milder, cloudy, gloomy feel will push northwards through the day, so plenty more cloud around through tomorrow, with drizzly rain coming and going, particularly across western areas, persisting across the north of Scotland. More southeastern areas will stay largely dry, but you couldn't rule out some drizzly rain from time to time. But everywhere we'll see this southerly breeze bringing that milder air, so another fairly mild day for the time of year on Thursday. Some blustery rain will sweep across the country on Thursday night, perhaps clearing just through the first few hours of Friday morning in the south and east, but many areas, once that clears, will see a dry and fine day with more sunshine on the cards too. However, in the north and west, there will be more in the way of showers. So plenty of sunshine for Friday. Should stay dry into the weekend, but sunshine will be at a bit of a premium. See you later.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on